So I'd like to introduce our next moderator, Jason Oxman, CEO of Electronic Transactions Association. I met Jason a few months back and asked him to put together an executive roundtable on the state of mobile wallets and payments for us. So please welcome Jason Oxman, who will introduce his panelists to you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for being here today, and thanks to Elliot and this terrific conference. Delighted to have the opportunity to talk to everybody today about an area of mobile commerce that's really attracting a lot of attention. And when you hear from the panelists here today, you will very soon see why. Mobile payments, if you think about the two words in mobile payments, mobile and payments, really capture something that is a beloved area for consumers. On the mobile side, we all know the stats. There are more mobile phones in service in the US than there are people in the US. 321 million mobile phone subscriptions currently active for 311 million Americans. The same is true on the payments side. Consumers love using electronic payments. If you look at the traditional measures for credit and debit card use, there are more than 1 billion cards in service in the US, again, for 311 million people. So you combine consumers' love affair for mobile with their love affair for payments, and you can see quite readily why the world of mobile payments is really one that we're all paying a lot of attention to. Now, ETA, the Electronic Transactions Association, which I run, is based in Washington, D.C. We're the nonprofit trade association of the payments industry. You may think, if you can look at other legacy industries, that the payments industry might not have embraced mobile payments. After all, we can look back over time. Take the record industry, for example. The record labels did not particularly embrace the ability of consumers to go online for music because they were in the business of selling plastic discs and they couldn't figure out how to migrate that business plan. So they did everything they could to kill it. And those are, there are stories legion in incumbent industries across time. The buggy whip industry did not react very well to the advent of the car. John Philip Sousa, a composer, took a break from composing marches to go lobby Congress to outlaw the player piano. Why? Because he thought it would kill the market for sheet music. But the payment industry has a really good story to tell, as does the mobile industry. And the reason for that is we are embracing mobile payments because it gets more transactions on the network. Anything that makes it easier, safer, more reliable, more convenient for consumers to choose electronic payments instead of cash, that's good for our industry. And that's why you're seeing the explosion of innovation. And that's what we're going to talk about on this panel today. So let me introduce briefly those who I have arrayed to my left. They are true pioneers, true innovators in our industry, representing some of the most dynamic companies participating in the mobile payments ecosystem today. It's a pleasure to have them here. You will, of course, have an opportunity to interact with them. I'll save some time for questions at the end. And I'm looking forward as much as you are to hearing their insight. Let me introduce them, starting immediately to my left with Ben Milne, who is the CEO and founder of Dwolla. Next to Ben is Hamilton Chan, who is the CEO and founder of PayDragon. Sean Harper is the director of product management of Groupon Payments at Groupon. And Ashish Ashkar is the director of mobile commerce for Verizon Wireless. So as you can see, we've covered the entire end-to-end ecosystem of mobile payments. And we're going to start hearing a little bit of insight from Ashish from Verizon Wireless. Ashish, over time, since the mobile phone was first really became mainstream, consumers have gradually become accustomed to using their phone for things that in the first rollout of the phone weren't necessarily contemplated. The idea of the mobile phone obviously was to use it as a phone. But over time, consumers have become accustomed to using their phone for a lot of other things, communicating with one another, engaging in mobile commerce, using their phone to store their music collection, watch videos. Now we're at a point where consumers are starting to think about using their phone as a payments device. But we do see concern expressed by consumers about security and other issues that may cause them some pause in using their phone as a payment device. Ashish, can you tell us from Verizon's perspective, from the perspective of the nation's largest wireless carrier, how are we doing in that consumer education? Where are we in the process of helping consumers understand the value of using their phone to initiate a payment?
Sure. I mean, if you really look at the framing here, about 10 years ago, we started vending content So people who purchase content on their mobile devices, we started with carrier billing, brought a lot of security and safety around how you make those purchases, have those charges end up on the carrier bill, right? So we took a major big step a few years ago in launching a contactless payments initiative. And we knew going in, security is going to be something that we have to be aware of. And educating customers on the security is going to be challenging. So we've made sure in the pilots that we launched last year that security and how a mobile wallet is going to prevent any sort of fraudulent transactions, how it's going to add value to the existing sort of payment mechanisms we have. And it's part of the sales pitch that a rep has in our stores. So initially, I think that it's going to be one-on-one conversations in our stores, getting the market sort of geared up, started up. And over a period of time, as people see others using these devices in stores, you're going to see a lot more adoption. You're going to have people feel that, okay, the person next to me and my friends and family are using it, and there's going to be a point where there's going to be an inflection where more people will start using it.
Sean, that's the consumer side. Let's talk about it from the merchant side. You came to Groupon when Groupon acquired a company you co-founded, Fee Fighters, a payment company. And your job at Groupon now, in Groupon's payments business, in part, is to convince merchants of the value of mobile acceptance, enabling customers to use their mobile phones for payments. Because obviously there are two sides to the equation. The consumer needs to adopt it, as Ashish talked about, but of course the merchant needs to as well. How are we doing out there in the marketplace in convincing merchants of the value of accepting mobile payments and, equally importantly, making the investment in the POS, point of sale infrastructure that they need to enable the acceptance of mobile payments?
I think it really depends on what you mean by mobile payments. And so if you're talking about telling a merchant, like, hey, we want you to rip out this old POS stuff that's super antiquated, it doesn't work very well, and replace it with something modern, probably tablet-based, that's a lot easier to sign up for, that probably is much simpler in the terms and conditions and pricing, that gives you all of this logic and capabilities to manage your customers and really run your business off of it. Yeah, that's a no-brainer. I mean, they're signing up for it left and right, and the value proposition is really easy to the merchant. I think if what you mean by mobile payments is somebody walking into a store and paying with their phone rather than a credit card, I think that's a lot tougher. And I really, really think that security is a red herring here. It's not about security. The problem is that there's not a good value proposition for it. So if what you're really telling the customer is like, hey, stop using this thing that, one, by the way, is mobile. Credit cards are mobile. They're in my pocket. Two, is pretty secure enough for most people. Three, essentially bribes you to use it with all of these rewards. And four, you're completely accustomed to, and now I want you to do something totally different. That's actually really hard to convince somebody to do. So we believe that the way to crack this and really make better shopping experiences for everybody is you're probably not going to compete with credit cards in terms of, one, their established usage already, and two, their rewards. But you need to start having shopping experiences that are much, much richer. And what you have, and you can't do that using the old merchant technology. And so you have to replace the merchant technology. And that's why we're really starting by going out to all the merchants and trying to improve their lives and put this enabling stuff into their stores.
Hamilton, that raises one of the, I think, the most interesting questions about payments is when you talk about mobile payments, is it really about payments? As Sean mentioned, the existing credit card infrastructure, it works pretty well. Everybody's been using these cards with the magnetic stripe on the back for 40, 50 years, and it's not really a problem. So many people say that the success of mobile payments will be based on doing something more for consumers, making their lives easier, more rewarding, more loyalty, making sure they don't have to stand in line, rather than just the payments piece. From your perspective, is that the model that's going to make mobile payments succeed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing now is basically, the way I look at it is where e-commerce was in 1995, m-commerce is in 2013. We all know the power of mobile computing. We all are very much reliant already these days on our smartphone or tablet devices. It seems to me a no-brainer that we're just going to keep going in that direction. And it's only going to become a reality when it becomes even more frictionless and when the we reach the tipping point for the consumer value proposition. So it's really about when it becomes more useful for a consumer to be able to pay from a smartphone than it is to do the credit card. So one of the things that PayDragon does, for example, is it lets you pay from your mobile phone instead of having to wait in line at a restaurant and get to the front of the POS before you make a payment. So there, the consumer value proposition is, I already know what I want, I'm already ready to pay, and instead of having to waste time in my life, and everyone's always short on time, make that payment through the phone. But it is a very, very tricky and daunting task to make all of this happen, because you have to, first of all, be well known enough that consumers will know to download your app. They have to have a connection to download it. They'll have to create an account, associate a credit card. So in a way, the credit card is still going on. It's just more in the background. And then to make a purchase and to make it a habit. And going down that funnel is extremely difficult. I think it's a little bit easier on the merchant side, like Sean was saying. But the consumer side is where we feel all the gravy is, because if you can get that part down and people start using it regularly as part of a life-enhancing experience, then I think you're going in the right direction of the market.
Yeah, even just from a numbers perspective, the merchants are an easier nut to crack. There are only a few million Main Street merchants in the whole country, whereas there are 300 million people.
Yep.
Ben, you started Dwolla and got a lot of attention because not only were you taking advantage of consumers' increasing interest in being mobile, using the ubiquitous availability of broadband services to pay for things, but you're also disrupting the decades-old payment networks as well, looking to provide consumers a new way to not only use their mobile devices to pay and to interact with merchants and with each other, but also a whole new paradigm for how people view the movement of money. So for you, thinking back to the time that you came up with the idea to start Dwolla, what's most exciting for you about the opportunities presented by the new world of mobile payments?
I mean, if you think about mobile just theoretically, the phone is just like, it doesn't really matter. It's just an internet connection, right? And one of our kind of core beliefs is that anyone with an internet connection should be able to access their money and exchange it with anybody else without the receiver of that payment paying kind of high fees, if you will, interchange fees, infrastructure fees associated with fraud, and so on and so forth. And the reality is a lot of mobile payment traction, is like we define mobile payments, is actually happening because we're basically opting consumers in without a choice. You want to use Uber, you're going to tell me you have cash to pay for an Uber ride? The only reason I have cash right now is because when I got to San Francisco, somebody told me I had to take it, so I had to get Nicole to go to an ATM to like actually physically hand me cash. And I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks trying to spend it. Like, how many people actually have cash on them? There's not a single hand up in this room that I see. Like, there's a few more, but it's still not the majority, right? How many people have plastic cards? Okay, so if everybody's got plastic cards, the reality is if you want to use Uber, if you want to use any number of these applications, you're basically going to use a Braintree service on the other side, get your credit card information in, and then it's going to be portable across different applications. And the reality is if you want to engage in a platform with the benefits that mobile brings, you don't really have a choice on whether or not you're going to engage in a mobile payment. I think the reality is right now you simply pull your card out and type in a 16-digit account number because you kind of have to. But if you look at the way Apple even recently did it, Apple's not building a wallet. Apple just pre-populated your credit card. I heard the argument that's the best mobile wallets anybody has ever seen because it does what you want and lets you get what you want faster. So I think that, at least my view, is that mobile presents an interesting opportunity because in order to utilize the software that's in mobile, we're essentially providing an opportunity to start putting new networks into the flow, or you might not even need to take a card out of your wallet. So for somebody like me who looks at account opening through the transaction stream as purely, passing data and authorizing someone else to bill an account, it's a huge opportunity in getting in between kind of the transaction stream and providing the merchant with, there's tens of billions of dollars in wasted capital in the current infrastructure and the way that we process payments, and I think merchants should get that money back and build better businesses with it.
Ashish, back to the phone company perspective on this. Ben mentioned that there are a lot of players in the ecosystem, payment processors, merchants, consumers, issuers, a lot of companies in the pipeline. what's the role of the mobile network operator in the pipeline? You know, there's this interesting, if you look back over history, the deployment of broadband networks, there's this interesting tension between the network operator, who is obviously crucial to the equation, because none of this would be possible without Verizon Wireless enabling mobile connectivity to the internet. But there's a lot of stuff that rides over your network that you don't necessarily have anything to do with. Verizon, I think, has been very active in investing in a variety of different platforms, from carrier billing companies to ISIS, contactless payments, to barcode services. You've been very active out there. How do you see, from Verizon's perspective, how do you see the role of the carrier, the mobile network operator, in enabling and perhaps participating in all of these different payment pathways that we're talking about?
So as you look at payments, right, it's not just about contactless. It's, you know, we've done carrier billing for a very long time. And one of the things with carrier billing is, I think Ben pointed out, is the seamlessness of the transaction. Merchants love carrier billing because they're able to seamlessly transact without opening an account. You already have an existing relationship with your carrier. You can leverage that. You can utilize a very secure, powerful network around making sure that when the device is getting connected to the network, you are who you are. Some of the basic sort of authentication techniques we utilize on sort of the network can be leveraged in a variety of ways, right? To enable payments, most importantly, enable seamlessness of payments. Because to us, it's about a shopping experience. To us, it's about how can you leverage the assets we have in making commerce easier for our subscribers. So we always looked at this from that sort of macro level standpoint, and we've utilized sort of the assets and the enablers we have, we've positioned them the right way to be able to conduct some of the commerce elements we're launching. On the ISIS and contactless side, I think that you still require a sort of a carrier play in managing the device, managing how the device is getting connected to the network, how you handle some of the complexities on the supply chain of the device and the network. Right? I think that the other place where the carrier plays a very good role is in educating the subscriber base. People do look at us in terms of any services we launch, questions that come up, customer care calls they have to handle, and a touch point that a customer has within a retail store. So a lot of these things can be positioned in a manner that helps a shopping experience. At the end of the day, what you see is a payment sort of product and a pathway. But the underpinnings are really to enable commerce, right? That's how we look at it.
What is the average fee that's associated with a carrier billing transaction for the receiver of the payment?
So the carrier billing portion of it is, you can decompose it in a four-party model, right? In a carrier bill traditional environment, we also utilize a carrier bill as an issuance mechanism.
But the person receiving payment, just like straight up, what's it cost them to get the money? Like, how much does it cost the merchant to get the money? So, like, it used to be, 15% or even more. Right. Is it still? So
if you were to look at the value proposition to a merchant, right, in terms of how much they lose in a abandonment or a tail off, right, the value to them is there, because we still see merchants willing to pay for digital transactions. Now in a economy that's moving from a digital transaction to more hard goods purchases on a mobile device, the value proposition is still there. But I would argue that we would need to modulate a business model that is more amenable to a physical goods sale.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with carrier billing, right, is you're acting in a way that really does a lot for the merchant that is very different in other forms of payment, because the consumer is not going to pay you back for, I mean, if I buy something and it's charged to my Verizon Wireless bill, I'm probably not going to be paying that for 3 or 4 months. I mean, by the time it gets to the billing cycle, but you're going to pay the merchant a lot easier or a lot sooner than I'm going to pay you. It's actually quite a revolving credit benefit that you're providing to the merchant.
But we're talking about the value proposition to the merchant. But if it still costs 10% and the merchant only has 3.5% margin on all the food they serve, like the restaurants I visit, I want them to still be in business, and I could care less how fast I want to buy it. And if I was that merchant, I would be an absolute idiot to accept something that costs me that much money, because I'm upside down on every transaction. More people use that and I'm out of business. So where I was going with that is, where did the fees start? Where are they at? And the reality is the higher the fee is, the basically smaller market it can necessarily serve. And I think that for virtual goods and things like that, the biller model works really amazing, because you've got all this margin in the product, but in the physical world, even if it reduces friction for the merchant to accept the payment,
I
the
agree with
cost
you.
is still too high,
I agree.
right?
So the way I said it was the value proposition of a seamless checkout is still there, right?
Even if I lose money?
However, on the price and rate cards is where you're coming at. It's like the business model needs to evolve above and beyond what we do today on a Caterpillar for physical good transactions. Especially if you're buying a pair of socks or you're buying a pair of sneakers, it's going to be a different business model. And I think that we've always seen the value proposition to merchant as, hey, would you rather lose a sale than pay a higher interchange to make a sale, right? So there is that value proposition, and we actually are able to showcase so much higher conversion rates where you don't need to open a new account. That we see good data points that support the hypothesis.
Yeah, that raises an interesting question that Ben and Ashish are talking about in this dialogue. And Sean, I want to ask you about this. In the historic world of payment processing, the value proposition to the merchant when you were a payment processor talking to a potential merchant customer in 1980 was how much you're paying. What's the merchant discount rate, and am I going to be able to give you a rate that's better than the other guy gives you? Today, and I'd love to hear about this from Groupon's perspective. Today, the value proposition of the merchant includes that as a part of it, but I assume when you're talking about rolling out new technologies to merchants using the Breadcrumb platform or your competitors in the industry out there, that's a piece of the conversation, but it's not the entirety of the conversation, right? I mean, there's a lot more value to be had from upgrading from the simple swipe terminal to something else. Can you talk a little bit about how that conversation goes and what you're hearing from merchants about what's important to them? Obviously, that margin, as Ben mentioned, is obviously very important, but there's a lot more wrapped up in it as well, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So I think about there being like a merchant hierarchy of needs. That at the bottom is like, how do I get customers and then get them to come back? And then the next tier is like, how do I make my business operate efficiently and smoothly and profitably? And then the very, very top is like, how do I gain insight into my business? And so we're really focused on using, a lot of people focus on this middle tier, and they're like, how can we lower costs for the merchant? How can we smooth out their operations? When your Main Street merchants, the ones that are like really, really under siege right now, but also are really the ones that we love the most, their biggest problem is down here. And we look at this, we say, well, is there a way that we can use the payments data in a way that really helps the merchant get more customers and stay in business that way? And that's what is really resonating with them. And that's where most of our attention is focused. I think this middle thing, like cheaper, like of course it needs to be cheaper. Like it's, I'm biased. My company that Groupon bought was called Fee Fighters. Like we were very, very passionate about this. It's not right that it costs so much. What Ben said is absolutely correct. And what they're doing is super important because the cost of payments is too high for most merchants. If you look at how much the merchant makes in profit and how much is going to the whole payments chain, and the chain is really, really, really long, it's bad. It's really not fair, in my opinion.
Hamilton, let's talk about your conversation with merchants. Obviously, you're in the same kind of position where you're talking to merchants about things that are important to them. Again, as Ben mentioned, that margin obviously is very important. They don't want to be selling anything at a loss.
Yeah.
But obviously, you're adding more value to the chain, more benefits for their customers. How would you describe, we'll call it Harper's hierarchy of of payments inquiry, with apologies to other hierarchies. How does the conversation for you go? What are you hearing from your merchant customers about what's really important as they consider mobile payments?
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you're in the mobile payments industry, you are in a B2B to C situation, and you've got to please consumers and you got to please merchants, and you're really right in between. Fortunately, what the merchants care the most about is their consumers, and so I don't look at it, especially in what we do, we don't look at it strictly as raw mobile payment, but we look at it really as the mobile experience. And we are the interface for the business, potentially, with its consumers. So they're interested in what is the consumer experience like? How fast do I get to see the orders? Cost is also extremely important. And when you talk to SMBs, they are trying to save every dollar, every penny they can. So the extent to which the fees can be affordable is really, really important. If it can replace a type of cost that they're already spending for roughly the same amount, for example, merchant fees, then they'll listen to the rest of the conversation. But you first have to start with, look, the fee that we'll charge is very minimal, but the value that you will get is a better customer experience. And
Better customer experience or a new customer.
or a new customer, absolutely. And that's where then it's our job to really turn consumer heads and make it a great mobile experience. And there is a lot of value to be called there, because there are a lot of times when people will see a big line and say, you know what, I don't want to wait in this thing, I'm going to go take my business elsewhere. Or there are times when people have the impulse to buy something, but they don't have the easy ability to do so, and they forget about that impulse and they end up not transacting. And so with digital computing and the connected world that we now live in, it's possible to capture that intent at the time that it's experienced. But in that case, you're going to have a very compelling consumer experience that's designed for that mobile impulse moment.
Ben, obviously, you would put the fee savings at the top of Harper's hierarchy, as you framed the question earlier. Tell us about your conversations as you get Dwolla out there, your merchant customers. How are they prioritizing their needs when they think about accepting payments from their customers?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the structure of like fees and the fees associated with payments as being the most important, I mean, the reason that's so important to me is because in my last company, I was a sole founder. I was the only investor. I was the only one that had any equity in the company. And I was like in my early 20s, and I was losing $55,000 a year to credit card fees. In my early 20s, having like X employees, that was a new product line, that was a new employee, that was a new expansion, that was the beginning of like so much more. And as someone who understood that I could turn the 55 into 110 and 110 into 220, like, God, man, that really pissed me off. And I was, like so many small merchants, just simply beholden to this thing that I had no choice but to deal with. And so when I look at it, I just think, should people have to pay that? Well, philosophically, no, because we have all the technology to bypass all of it, just no one's taken the time to build it and then distribute it. So I think that step one is build it and distribute it, and step two is educate and let the world kind of do what it wants with it. And we don't really concentrate a lot on consumer experience right now. And if you use our products, you'll probably actually see that. We have a lot of work to do. We concentrate on people who are acting as merchants a lot, especially consumers. So I'm going to get paid $1,000 or $5,000 and so on and so forth. That's kind of what we concentrate on, because those are people that they're going to see that big fee, if that makes sense. So I think where a lot of people are talking about the proposition at the POS, you know, we stay away from that because it is so expensive to convert someone there. The example I use a lot is, does everybody have like a favorite restaurant? All right, thanks for those who responded, right? Like, I've got some places like absolutely love to go. And if you come trying to hawk me a different card while I'm sitting there like eating whatever I'm eating, it doesn't really matter. But I think you and the company you're trying to sell me in the middle of like my dinner now sucks. And so we don't want to try and provide that experience or try and do sales there. What we do is the merchant may or may not understand, and then we try and give them tools to educate the consumer on why it's good for their business, because quite frankly, the businesses you really love, you support. And quite frankly, a lot of businesses, especially things like restaurants, fail, and it doesn't matter how many lead generation tools they have, it's because the burgers suck. The place with the good burgers are the places you wait in line at. The places with great burritos, same thing. I went to Des Moines last week, and the one thing I wanted on Saturday morning was a Farm Boy burrito at the farmer's market. Like, I know where to go. And I even used cash there because that's what they take. Like, you do what like the merchants you love need to stay in business. And I just think that like we underestimate merchants' ability to provide good products that people want to buy. They don't always need more lead generation tools. I do think they're very valuable. And I do think that a lot of merchants have won because of Groupon and build great customer bases. But at the end of the day, like, it's not my business. I just want you to make more money when you get paid.
I agree with you that the product ultimately is the thing that makes a business. But I think also everybody likes to be treated like a VIP. So if you fly frequently on Virgin America and you now have access to the express line, that makes you feel good about the business. Or if you go to a restaurant that you go to all the time and they know your name and they're like, hey, Ben, it's great to see you again. And by the way, don't worry about the fries. We got that covered. Or something like that, that makes you feel good. So yeah, it does come down to the product, and people don't want to get marketed to all the time. But I think there is a little bit of a place, at least, for an enhancement of the experience that technology can help provide.
Yeah, I think that people do love to be treated well, and if you can even make decisions on how to help them better based on historical data, that's really great. And that's one of the reasons why when you OAuth into Dwala's network from a consumer perspective, we allow the consumer to share everywhere they like with the platform. So we actually open that up to mobile wallets to be able to make better decisions around suggestions, which is something that, as far as I know, you can't do today with Visa and MasterCard.
And if you want to know where Ben is dining or buying coffee, follow him on Twitter, as I do, because every time he pays with Dwala, you get a little Twitter alert. You can see how many cups of coffee he's had over the course of the day, although apparently
lot.
for burritos it doesn't work.
Yeah,
And it is
it
a lot
did
of
not.
coffee. It is a lot. I wish there was some filter that I could put on there. Not that I don't enjoy keeping up on where you're having coffee.
It's okay.
Because I do. Ashish, I want to go back to the question of the mobile ecosystem, and specifically the way in which the mobile market works here in the US as opposed to around the world. Here in the US, consumers generally have a choice of phones provided to them by carriers because the carriers subsidize the phones here in the US. That's the model that we have. And what that means is the carriers obviously have a lot more impact over what features and functionalities the handset manufacturers put in those phones because you're going to sell them at a subsidy, so I don't have to go pay $800 for a phone. I can, thanks to Verizon, pay $99 for a phone. The rest of the world is a little different. People are more used to buying unsubsidized phones, and therefore there's a wider variety of features available. From the perspective of Verizon Wireless, how do you see the role of the feature set in the handset? Obviously, for ISIS, which Verizon is a part of, you need to have an NFC chip in the phone. And there are a couple dozen models out there, but many of them, including the iPhone, don't have the NFC chip in them. Obviously, that's an important factor in the success of contactless payments. Talk to me about how Verizon's thinking on the role of the handset. Is there an expectation that consumers are going to go into the Verizon Wireless store and say, I'm not going to take that handset because it doesn't have the mobile payment feature I want in it? Or are we not quite there yet where a consumer is going to be making the decision of what handset to invest in, or Verizon making the decision about what handsets to carry based on mobile payments? Are we not quite there yet?
Well, it's a loaded question. There's a lot of questions in it. The one is, the feature set, right? We feel that, look, at some point, the device has to work with the network. So there has to be some pathway of certification and all those things that have to go in. Otherwise, you end up purchasing a $700 device and you find it's not performing the way it needs to perform. And just understanding the complexity, there's a lot that goes on the device, on the software side, that has to work with the network side. There's complexity that a carrier does a very good job of solving. And now, to your specific question on, NFC and that sort of stuff. Well, I think we're not at a point yet where consumers will demand that I want NFC or not. I think that it'll take some time for that evolution to happen. The results we got from pilots was the adoption was primarily the early adopters, people who wanted to try the product out, and I've sat through focus groups where they really wanted things to work in terms of the time it took to activate and things like that. So there are those sort of data points that we get, but I feel that we're not there. I think there will be a point that we'll do a switchover. In terms of a subsidy model, just the cost of the handset is such that it's difficult for a normal consumer to absorb the cost on their own. Okay, and the pace of innovation that is there on the handset side is so much that the cost curve cannot be managed, in a short duration of time. And I feel that, for the innovation to keep going, Samsung launching new devices in the S4, you really need that to be able to get a broader innovation in the handset ecosystem. And, the carrier is there to be able to manage their innovation in such a way they can bring that innovation to market at a price point that a consumer is willing to bear.
Sean, from Groupon's perspective, when you're thinking about mobile payments, do you think about platform? Do you think, I just went to Verizon Wireless last week and got the new BlackBerry Q10. Yes, I have a BlackBerry. I don't know if anybody's still carrying one of these, but go BlackBerry.
I love that there's people in the back. I got one.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the forward-thinking technology guy on the panel. As you know. But this has an NFC chip in it. But I don't know that I'd look to use my Groupon mobile payments capability on it. Groupon obviously has a very successful mobile app. Does that factor into the equation? What phone models have what capabilities? What platforms are popular when you're deciding how to enable mobile payments for Groupon customers?
Yeah, of course it does. But really the more important thing is how does the customer want to shop? And I think it's entirely possible, like we in the payments industry spend a lot of time thinking about things like contactless and NFC. I don't think that's really on most consumers' radar screens. But what I can tell you is on their radar screens is the card on file checkout. So if you think about what PayDragon is doing or what we're doing or what Uber is doing, it's probably the most successful example. Like that ability to be like, you already have my payment information. I don't need to do anything. Bump my phone. I don't need to swipe a card. That actually is really a nice experience. And I think, there's a pretty good chance, in my opinion, that that experience will just leapfrog the whole NFC conversation entirely because it is more consumer friendly.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I was on the road quite a bit last week. I used Uber 5 times in 3 days in 3 different cities. And if Uber required me to use NFC to touch something in the car, that'd be fine with me because I just love the service so much. It's just so great. Hamilton, from your perspective, obviously you have customers who have a variety of different phones in their pockets, and you have merchants who have a variety of different capabilities. Does that factor into your decision when you're out there in the marketplace? What phones consumers are using? What payment technology they're using on those phones? How does that factor in?
Well, first of all, we start with the base, unfortunately, of iPhone and Android, not BlackBerry, but that covers so much of the demographic that we're looking to serve.
It's okay, I have an iPhone too.
Okay, awesome. And we think it has to be a native app experience. We think the web browser, it doesn't give you the frictionlessness that you're looking for in a mobile payment. As to whether it's a QR code or an NFC thing, we have actually coded both, and you can, with our app, for example, you can scan a product's UPC code and buy it with a click. In the end, it really is, just like Sean was saying, about the customer getting what they want. They'll overcome whatever roadblock is necessary as long as you can deliver them the goods. So if, like the Uber experience, if they make you do it through NFC and you have an NFC phone, you'd be like, fine, I'll do it. Yeah. I do think definitely at the forefront of the consumer's mind is not the technology, it's the benefit. So, it's really about why is this better? One of the things I like to do sometimes when I walk into a Starbucks is I like to ask the person at the POS, how many people actually pay with their phone? And I've just noticed that every quarter that number gets higher. I remember them saying before, only a handful of people, then 10%. And I had a cashier recently tell me that 50% of the people who pay at Starbucks use the Starbucks app. And I think it's because that app has got their loyalty baked in. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. They all have credit cards. It's in their pocket, but they're starting to switch over. And I don't think people are caring that it's a barcode or a tap or anything like that. It's just the holistic experience. Yeah. Starbucks has the clout to make it happen.
Sure, and they're the largest they're the largest mobile payments processor in the country right now.
It's a really interesting disconnect. Like we've heard 3 of us talk a lot about small businesses because I know that's like all we think about. We don't care about those big businesses. But there's a really big difference. And I think what you'll see is there are some early adopters among the big businesses. So like Starbucks or like, I really love Chipotle. Like, yeah, it's a chain, but I like it. And their mobile checkout experience is awesome. I order before I go into the store and I just walk in, I grab it and I leave. So there are some that'll go early. And then there are some that, they're just big businesses and they're not innovative. It'll take them forever and they probably won't ever do anything that makes their shopping experience better. And then there's this whole, long tail of small businesses that we interact with every day that are really, really disadvantaged on the technology side. And, but on the other hand, like they're really open-minded because they don't care if the technology wasn't invented there. And they don't have any allegiance to their existing payment system because it's not serving them very well. And so I think that's where most of the disruption is going to happen. And certainly where we're focused on making the disruption happen because there's so much pain. If you ask a business owner, how they think about their, like a Main Street business owner, how they think about their payments and POS, I mean, it's almost hard to say which thing they're most dissatisfied with. They have so many complaints. It just really doesn't serve them very well at all.
Ben, how does the question of what consumers, what device they're using, what platform they're on, what capabilities of their phone are, what wireless network operator they use. How does that factor into your decision-making process as you're building it? Because you're building out not just a payments platform, you're building an entire network. So to what extent does the technology that your customers, your current and future customers are using, how does that play into the decision of what capabilities to launch and on what platforms?
So, I mean, my decision-making process looks like, is it connected to the internet? Then I care. Is it not connected to the internet? Then I don't care.
That's pretty
So-
straightforward.
All phones in some capacity are just messaging systems, right? Like you're hitting servers. It's all you're doing. You're saying, I want this thing, and for that thing, I'm willing to give this person this much value, which this software has access to, and then they're going to attribute to this other person. That's like, at its core, how that actually happens is a mess on a whiteboard, but the reality is where that transaction originates from, it shouldn't matter. As long as you can pass the authorization correctly, it shouldn't matter. And it should do it without 16-digit account numbers, and it should do it without some of the legacy costs. And I also think that people that are building mobile wallets, that are building other things where the networks just need to be embedded, should be able to build software for whatever device that they want, as long as it's connected to the internet. And even things like SMS can talk to servers. You don't think about SMS as like an internet-connected technology, but it is. Well,
think about M-Pesa, right? I mean, 85% of transactions in Kenya that move money are doing so over SMS. I mean, it's a hugely successful platform for moving money.
I agree 100%. And I think that when you look at even like opportunities for new networks, I mean, M-Pesa is so expensive, and in an economy where your average daily wage is so much lower, imagine giving up 10% of how much money you make just because of the way you're getting paid. If our technology is successful in the United States and taking it to other countries where we can give people 10% of their income back just by replacing the existing infrastructure, I think that's really meaningful.
Let me pause at this moment and see if there are questions from the audience for our panel. And by see if there are questions from the audience, I actually can't see the audience. So if you have a question, it'd be very helpful if you would. Oh no, somebody just raised. I actually did. I see shapes mainly, and it looks like there's a shape of someone standing up.
Which is funny because I have glasses too. So
it's not the glasses. It's actually the blinding halogen lights in my face that are making it hard.
For
to see
the panel, my name is Michael Singer. I'm with Tab Times, and we've alluded to this in terms of SMS payments. How disruptive do you both or all the panels see that as an alternative to these fees? You know, here in San Francisco and in New York, you have these gypsy cabs, and I'm basically paying my friends and neighbors, maybe even without having the, through my phone. Without the experience of going through pretty much any of your networks. I'm just curious how disruptive that will be to your group. And then additionally, with the notion, not necessarily of the near-field communications, but just being able to use any device for transfer of payment, how disruptive is that going to be for your model? So SMS first.
You want to take that, Ben?
I mean, SMS is just a behavior, right? Just like NFC or just, I mean, it says a lot, but if you can cough and the cash register could tell it was you, like it's just something that hits a server, right? So I think...
Is that the next Square thing?
Oh, maybe, right? Validation through biometrics associated with a cough. I think that'd be pretty interesting. Good hack day project for Michael. I think that, like, those are all just trials, and we're just trying to see what works. If SMS worked, I don't know if it changes our model a lot. It's good for Verizon, obviously, passing text messages. And as far as NFC or anything else, just behaviors attached to a server, and we see ourselves as the server. So for us, we're totally agnostic as to which behavior takes on. We just want to be compatible with the behavior as it takes off.
Which I think is back to my opening remarks, which I think is kind of the reason that this is going to be successful, because for all payments companies and all payments networks, getting more transactions on the network is the ultimate goal, and the way in which that payment is initiated is really not important. It's the fact that it gets onto the network that matters. That's why I think this is a business that's very exciting. Let me see if I can see. Yes, go ahead. There's a question right here. Oh, you're all very good-looking people. That's great.
Hey, my name's Gary from True Religion brand jeans. I had a question. Both Sean and Hamilton both alluded to the credit card on file, potentially just bypassing everything else because it's so much easier, and I 100% agree. Why do you guys think that stuff's not built into the browser? Why does it require an app to scan the card or have a simple checkout process? Why doesn't WebKit support taking a picture of my credit card rather than typing in 16 digits every single time?
That's an interesting question because we've moved there with ACH, with checks, right? Mobile banking is the most popular feature set. Remote. I mean, when was the last time anybody walked into a bank branch to deposit a check? You take a picture of the check and it deposits. It's great. Anybody want to talk about the ability of web browsers to support?
Because
payment
Apple
credentials?
doesn't then get a cut of anything. I mean,
All right, next question.
no, it's a great point. Life would be very, very different for app developers if the browser could be just as effective as a native app. But I think Apple set up that paradigm long time ago and supplied WebKit and basically made it so that apps were the main thing. Palm Web OS was built on a web operating system, and that fell apart. And so I think ever since then, it's really been about a native app experience, which Apple was very capable of controlling. And I think with browsers, it can get complicated because not everyone has a Safari browser. Then you got to support Chrome, and what happens if they use Opera? So you can fall into the same trap. So I think the way it is the way it is, and we'll just play with those tools that are provided to us. But definitely, if the web browser on mobile phones was capable of doing these various things, I think app developers would migrate that way.
I don't have anything to add.
All right. Other questions from the audience? Yeah, we have a question down here in the front.
Sean Princell, Cashflow Solutions. We're talking about the profitability of payments. Where do you see the role and the future evolution to same-day ACH affecting the evolution of mobile payments?
Well, that's a great question. Just to set this, in case everyone's not familiar with what same-day ACH is, ACH is the movement of money between automated clearinghouse. It's checking accounts. And ACH is actually controlled by an association called NACHA. And NACHA is made up of the banks that facilitate ACH transactions. ACH is not a real-time transaction. It's usually settlement in a matter of hours or overnight. And there was a proposal before NACHA to change the rules to make instantaneous settlement, and the proposal failed. It was voted down by the banks. A cynical explanation for that might be, some have said, not me certainly, that banks wanted to protect their wire transfer fees, which are an enormous percentage of their profitable service offerings. So anyway, just that by way of background. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to. Ben, probably you're in the best position because ACH, again, is another payment network that you're disrupting with Dwolla. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time. How many people are like payments geeks? They knew everything that was just said about ACH before now. Okay, so for those that don't, the scale of the ACH system, it processes around $34 trillion annually. Credit cards and debit cards are in the single-digit trillions. Wire transfers are in the hundreds of trillions. So the scale of business we're talking about completely dwarfs the scale of like the consumer markets that we're talking about. It's unbelievably massive. And when you look at the same day initiative, like it's not enough, it's incremental. The reality is it's built on a batch protocol that's just when the files are going to clear with the same 80x return codes and the same return processes where the payments aren't good for 90 days, so the exposure still exists in the economy. I mean, the jump is where you get to true real time, and getting to true real time is at the point where you truly can go anywhere to anywhere now with a fraud system baked in, and that's what we distribute under the FiSync name. And we're onboarding financial institutions right now with it. And, is there anybody from the Federal Reserve Bank here today? I mean, I love those guys. I think that they've basically taken a system that was basically all hard copy ledger and made it all digital, and it's the foundation of our economy. Without ACH, our economy would halt. If it was just turned off tomorrow, it would halt. And I think that same-day ACH is just incremental. It's not what it should be. And you can't change rules piece by piece. You have to replace the system. That's the only way to fix the problem.
There are
problems.
There's also a third issue, right? So Ben just talked about there are basically three reasons why ACH isn't used for consumer-to-consumer payments. and one is the speed, and then two is like the risk rules around it.
So, but ACH is used for consumer payments. I mean, how many people have credit cards? In the room, credit cards. Where's that money come from? Somebody tell me. Please. Comes from your bank account, right? Every single payment you make eventually goes over ACH, right? Everybody's just built layers and layers and layers and layers on top of it, which is why the payments are so expensive. ACH was just real time, not real time guarantees, but if it was, we wouldn't need the rest.
But there's a third thing that those guys are solving, right? So credit cards are essentially wrapping security and speed on top of ACH. They're also wrapping a better UI, because the UI on ACH is terrible. Like, who knows their routing number? I don't know my routing number.
So, but you put it in to pay off your credit card, you get to it once, and then once you set it up, it's done, which is the same argument we make for 16-digit account numbers. And fraud, how much money does fraud account for in basically 16-digit account number ecosystems? It's almost as much as interchange. Like a better fraud system, yeah, sort of, except for the fact that you can buy 50,000 credit cards on like some sub forum somewhere for next to nothing and then pop it into somebody else's form. Who pays for that? Consumers pay for that. Merchants pay for that. It's an infrastructure problem that we just roll off the cost of on everybody else, and it's ridiculous. Sorry, I got excited. We started talking about ACH. That's what happens.
Yeah. Hey.
Thanks, by the way, for not booing me for that.
Other questions for the panel? Anyone want to ask a question of someone other than Ben?
So we talked about a number of things, but we didn't talk much about fraud. I think the first time it came up was just there. Can the panelists speak to what do you think the future of the fraud model is in mobile payments? Who's responsible for the KYC? How do you see that evolving?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it goes back, Ashish, to the infrastructure question I was asking before about the different players involved in the architecture. And mobile payments, if we think of them as an initiation of a credit card transaction, one of the reasons consumers feel okay about using mobile payments because they've got all the liability protection that they would have for using their credit card. If somebody takes my $20 bill out of my pocket and goes and spends it, I'm out $20. But if someone takes my credit card or my mobile phone and tries to use it to buy $20 worth of goods, I have zero liability for that. So thoughts from the panel on how the fraud piece is a component of the mobile payments architecture?
So one of the things we've looked at is, you pointed out KYC, but it really, when you look at 1999 versus where we are right now, in terms of e-commerce was purely 16-digit numbers, you put those numbers in, versus, sort of the contactless payments world or plastic world, where these are two disparate sort of worlds, okay? And what mobile has done is it's trying to draw convergence in these two worlds. And I think the security model, the fraud model will evolve based on that. I think there's not a whole lot of heuristic data to be able to say, what sort of fraud models would be, existing. But we think that, when you pair a user with a device, that device is very personal. And the device is a lot smarter than your plastic, okay? And so inherently, there are abilities, we will uncover that will address authentication, will address pairing a user to the device in such a way that, you will know exactly who it is at the point of sale. Could be a physical point of sale.
It's a lot more secure than the plastic card, right? But it does add another player in, because if something goes wrong with the credit card transaction, it never enters my mind or anybody else's to call the manufacturer of that piece of plastic, the plastic molding company, and say, oh, something went wrong with my credit card transaction, you must be responsible. But they are going to call Verizon when something goes wrong in the mobile payments environment, right?
Well, it depends. So I think that it depends on how you are encapsulating the underlying payment technology and providing more security in such a way that, one, you're providing seamlessness of transaction, and also you're providing added security that allows for lower fraud. And I think that in most fraud today, if you look at online versus plastic in the physical environment, it's more online, right? And using your device, through a network or through whatever credentials you might have on the device itself in a security mode, you'll be able to definitely, solve for security and fraud. Now, there are data points that are so small and minuscule to be able to hypothesize what would look like in terms of who bears the risk is hard to say, but definitely there's an evolution going on in terms of how a security model will evolve.
But from the consumer angle, I think we're in such a privileged state now where the consumers feel safe about doing electronic payments. And whether that's over e-commerce, m-commerce, I do feel like fraud has dropped down in terms of the level of priorities for the consumer. They assume that because they're doing a credit card in the back end, that somehow or another any kind of fraud will be sorted out and they'll be safe. And then in terms of sorting that process through, that's where a company like PayDragon or the merchant ultimately will get involved. But I just feel like from our focus on the user experience and the consumer, that's become more or less a non-issue thanks to people getting accustomed to e-commerce. And I think that's a great thing, and that's a huge mental leap to have already overcome that will make mobile payments that much easier to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll try not to go off on another 5-minute tangent.
That's okay.
But fraud is like a network level problem. We have a data problem. The reality is like how many people have had identity theft? Said it's a lot. Okay, if there's actually that many people in the room that have not had it, they're just waiting for you to get old or go on vacation. All your data is already out there. It's just when they're going to take advantage of it. And the reality is that's actually the system we all have to deal with. And in order for that to go away, the system has to change significantly. And even if fraud losses are down overall, kind of on industry standards, they're still really substantial. And I don't think that any new products that are built should continue to push it back on the banks, because the banks don't necessarily know how to do it. They license tools. They shouldn't always put it on the merchant, because the merchant doesn't know how to analyze for that information. And I just think it's another network level issue that needs to be taken really seriously.
We have time for one more question, then I'm going to ask their panelists for their closing thoughts on the one thing they're most excited about in mobile payments. So let's do one more question, and then we'll get closing thoughts from the panel.
Hi, Heather Wiles from Woodgeo Consulting. So historically, we've thought of fraud as people trying to steal identities or, attacking people that are cardholders. But now with this democratization of payments, it's really the seller that needs to be focused on. And I think that gentleman referencing KYC maybe was alluding to that. How do you keep track of who's accepting payments as you sort of break the historical payment structure open?
It is an interesting landscape, and obviously the Federal Trade Commission has been active in recent months, stepping up their enforcement action against payment networks and payment processors for bad merchant behavior. In the onboarding process, obviously there are protections in place, but no processor can be sure about whether a merchant is lying to them, and as part of that onboarding process. So how does the world of mobile payments change the fraud equation for merchant onboarding? Is it a different process in the mobile payments environment?
I mean, to echo some of what Ashish was saying and Sean was saying, the mobile phone carries with it so much more data about the transaction that it should be easier to smoke out fraud than ever before. As a small example of the way we do it, if we see multiple transactions happen within a very short period of time, we disable the transactions. We require just a little bit of a pause between transactions. And that's a tip-off that maybe someone's hacked something together to run a script. But yeah, when you talk about having location data and unique device identifiers and all those other things, I mean, I do think it should be easier than ever to combat fraud. That's my thinking.
I mean, in some ways, it's hard for us to kind of look at this from an onboarding standpoint, but I would just put things out there in terms of EMVCo and how that kind of would mandate dynamic data. May not affect onboarding directly, but over a period of time, dynamic data helps you, and you can provide a lot more data at the rails itself around a smarter device, right? And you can couple, a bunch of triangulation information on location along with the actual payment data. And that might help, do a lot more in fraud reduction. Not at the onboarding time, but over a period of time, you would know what merchants are good and what sort of best practices are to be adopted.
All right, let's close with each of our panelists having the opportunity to share with the audience the one thing you're most excited about in mobile payments. What's the one opportunity? What's the one technology coming down the path? What's the one thing about mobile payments that's most exciting to you? Ashish, can we start with you?
Well, one of the things that we've looked at is, payments is about enabling a shopping experience. And to us, it's actually a viewpoint that payments should be a non-event, right? People do not go to a store or do not, purchase it, anything just to make a payment. They're there to enable, their discovery of a product or finding out, right things they want to make a purchase on. So to us, it's been whatever the wallet can be, accepted in a manner that the merchant prefers. And I don't mean acceptance mark. I mean that can you, in your shopping experience, do a quick API call or things like that. You pull credentials so that a purchase can be made seamlessly. To us, that's very important, and I think that kind of excites us a lot.
Right. Sean?
So 30% of all offline purchases are researched and decided upon online, and that includes online on your internet-enabled phone. And almost 0% of those transactions are actually trackable into the merchant to see what happened. It's an enormous opportunity. Right? If you look at what happened to the internet and to online advertising and how much more efficient people got it, or businesses were able to get in their marketing when we were able to make a click trackable down into a purchase on a website, to do that same thing for all offline transactions. If we think about the money that small merchants waste on payments, that's one thing. It's actually a much larger amount of money that they're wasting on ineffective marketing. And so closing that loop is what is most exciting to me. I'd love to make the 30% of purchases, offline purchases that people are researching online, all of them trackable into the stores. So the merchants know why people are showing up and what they can do to make more people show up.
Hamilton, what are you most excited about?
The thing I'm most excited about is whenever we have a market where people have not done something that seems inevitable. And I think most people have not purchased something that's real through their smartphone. You may have downloaded an iTunes song or something like that, but actually buying a physical good from a native app on a phone is something very few people have done. So I'm excited about the 99% market out there. I think that in 5 years, we'll be transacting like crazy off our smartphones. And we're at the point right now where almost nobody is doing that. So I'm really excited about the market opportunity.
Ben, what excites you most about mobile payments?
So I'm going to steal the word inevitable. I thought that was awesome. So, I mean, if you look at other industries and you think about kind of the way the internet just sort of like ate other industries, it changed the way we talk to one another. It changed the way, we communicate, mail to email, the way we make phone calls, the way we transmit messages between one another. And when you think about not mobile payments as just like mobile payments, but as like the internet, it's the ability for the internet to connect the payments to anything and anything or anywhere we would ever want to be, or anyone we would want to buy from. And I just think the presence of the internet provides this huge opportunity to completely disintermediate the entire payment stack. Completely, totally, just all that crap, we don't need it. We don't need readers, we don't need anything. As long as it's connected to the internet, all that stuff can go away. And I think that opportunity inside of the internet, while mobile payments is connected to it, is like, that's awesome. And that's something that I think is an amazing opportunity that can provide a lot of value to people's lives.
Well, if you've enjoyed this panel, please take out your Verizon wireless phone at some point over the course of the afternoon. Download the Dwolla app, download PayDragon, download the Groupon Payments app, and check out all the great opportunities that mobile payments present. Please join me in thanking this terrific panel for our great discussion.
Thank you.